12th D'Amore-McKim School of Business COVID-19 Resilience Talk. I'm Debbie Magnesi. I'm the Assistant Dean of Development here at D'Amore-McKim School of Business. And if this is your first time joining us, just a bit of background on these talks. We began this speaker series in mid-March, right after we went remote at Northeastern, as a way to continue to engage with our community, to be able to bring thought leaders, both from inside our college and from our network of friends around the world, to be able to add value to all of you during these times of social and physical distancing, and to share some thoughts on some of the most pressing issues that are being brought to the surface through this global pandemic. So as I said, this is our 12th talk. We will have one more, so please keep your eyes open for that. And before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. For everyone's reference, this call is being recorded for future viewing. To that end, we're going to turn off everyone's videos and ask that you keep your microphones turned off so that we can have a nice clean recording, as these are going to be shared extensively throughout our alumni community going forward. I encourage you during the talk to click the button in the right top corner of your screen for the speaker view so that you can clearly see who's speaking, as opposed to a series of black rectangles across your screen. And then throughout the conversation, I encourage you to write any questions you have for the speakers into the chat box, either to the group or to me directly. And then once we get to the Q&A portion of the session, I'll be sure to get your questions answered by our speakers. So thank you again for joining us. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ravi Ramamarty, who's going to introduce you to our speakers. Ravi is our University Distinguished Professor of International Business and Strategy, as well as the Director for the Center for Emerging Markets. And we're thrilled to have him here to kick off this talk today. Thank you, Ravi.
Thank you, Debbie. It's my great pleasure to introduce our two speakers. Raj, who's our Dean at the D'Amore-McKim School of Business, I think doesn't need an introduction. He's by now a familiar face to many of you. But in case you don't already know, he's the Dunton Family Dean, and he came to us from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, a few years back, where he was Senior Associate Dean for Strategic Innovation. He is a distinguished academic and also a very a practitioner of innovation. And if I had to sum up Raj in 2 words, I'm going to try to do this for both speakers, sum them up in 2 words. It would be, the 2 words would be strategic innovation. I think Raj studies strategic innovation. He values strategic innovation, which I'm very happy, because it's lovely to have a dean who values that. And above all, he practices now strategic innovation. He did that in his previous job and is doing it marvelously at Northeastern. Our main featured speaker, Venkat Srinivasan, whose bio you may have seen when you registered, has, again, a very distinguished career. I can't go into all of the things he's done, but one of the things that's not touched on in the bio is his first career, maybe not his first, maybe his second career, as a scholar. You know, he was a professor of finance at Northeastern University, a colleague, actually. I mean, I had joined a few years before he did. And so I had the pleasure of knowing Venkat for over 30 years. But he was a scholar who then became an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur who started many companies very successfully, and is now a venture capitalist and also a philanthropist. So I'd say he's got about 4 careers at least under his belt up to this point. The 2 words that I would use to describe Venkat are boundaryless thinker. And this is the thing I find most fascinating about Venkat. He does not care about the boundaries that many of us pay a lot of attention to. For instance, when he was a professor in the finance area, having been trained as an accountant, by the way, he just became a professor of finance and breezed through tenure. But he published in many areas, not just in the field of finance, because I don't think it mattered to him what those boundaries were. The other boundary he is happily crisscrossed is between theory and practice. And I'll just give you one example of how effortlessly he's been doing that his whole life. His dissertation was based on his work experience in his first job in India. And the first company he started was based on his dissertation. Look at that loop between practice and theory and going back to practice. And he's been doing that his whole life. Even now, he wants to write books. Because that's part of his DNA. And the other boundaries that he's effortlessly crisscrosses is between the for-profit world and the not-for-profit world. I don't think he would see a very sharp distinction between those two. And some of the companies he started are for-profit, but they achieve so many other social objectives, and others are for primarily social objectives, but they are still profitable, because that's how you can scale up these innovations. So I'm sure in the course of the talk, we're going to hear a lot of nuggets and details about how you actually pull all of this off. I just want to say one more thing about Venkat, and that is in the last few years, he's reconnected with the Northeastern, and I've been absolutely delighted to have him on the advisory board of our Center for Emerging Markets. And I've taken advantage of his counsel on numerous occasions. So thank you, Venkat, for all that you've done. And so here's scholar, entrepreneur, venture capitalist, philanthropist, above all, a great friend, personal friend, and a friend of Northeastern, Venkat Srinivasan. I'm going to hand over to Raj. So I think, Raj, you have a plan in mind, and then...
Sure. Thank you, Ravi. That was a phenomenal introduction of Venkat, and more importantly, the right introduction, might I add. Greetings to all of you. I want to welcome all our faculty, staff, students, partners, parents, and friends who are here for this conversation. This conversation is personally meaningful to me for two different reasons. One, obviously, as Ravi alluded to in his introduction, this is the area that I studied as part of my professional career, research career. I focused on strategic innovations and how organizations can build and sustain strategic organizations. But the second part is talking to Venkat. As Ravi said, it's a great pleasure for me and an honor for me to talk to Venkat because Venkat actually is a part of D'Amore-McKim. He was a faculty member here before he ventured into this brave world of entrepreneurship and has become a phenomenal success. But more importantly, his insights, two things. Combining rigor and relevance has always been an important part for Venkat. And the other part is bringing humanity into capitalism is a huge part of Venkat's aspiration. So anyway, without further ado, Venkat, I wanted to start off by this broad question. And I'm sure many people in the audience are actually intrigued by this journey of yours. From an academic faculty member in finance, a very successful faculty member in finance, you went on to become an entrepreneur. You started eCredit, and one of the things, it's not just the entrepreneurship that intrigued me, but also the very fact that you were so way ahead of your time in terms of working on I would say future-focused technology. So I want to start off by asking you, what prompted this interest?
So first off, Raj, anytime Ravi introduces you, he makes your head swell, right? That is so, thank you, Ravi. You're always so generous. And Raj, thank you for inviting me, and to all of the organizers too, for putting this together. When you look back, and I suspect it is true for many people, when you look back, it all seems so premeditated. Right, we feel like, like Ravi nicely connected dots, and you connected some interesting dots. And maybe there was something subconscious, and I'm sure there was something deep inside, sort of the common things drive you. So maybe that's the only way you can logically explain these connections. But when you're looking forward, I think it is that deep interest in solving problems. And if I can borrow from you, Raj, that maybe solving problems in a way that can scale and that are, I think it started out simply being solving problems effectively. I think we spend a lot of time spending a lot of money, especially in this country, and really don't get to solve the problem. And that's examples are all around us. And so anyway, go to your question, the interest in computing started for me in my first job, which was when I came out as a CPA. And as Ravi mentioned, I started as an accountant. And never really did too much formal accounting when I worked for this US multinational, which was just an incredible learning experience for me working there. And the computing bug started because I used to hang around. We had two large IBM 1401s, which I think the people who are in our generation in this call would relate to, but the younger generation won't. And these are times when we used card punch readers and physical cards that we used to punch 80 columns instructions for the machine, and the machines had to be kept in these freezing environments. That's how I sort of got fascinated with computing. And there was a big connection between solving problems and computing. I saw a way to solve problems, and very nascent with that sort of, and I decided that subconsciously, not so actively, so I don't want to pretend like all this was ready-made in my head, it wasn't. And then I had an opportunity to come here and do my doctoral work, and I was very clear that what didn't excite me, frankly, was another finance PhD doing econometrics work, and somebody, sneezed on Wall Street, and what happened to prices, that sort of thing. Yeah, we were all trained to do all that very well, but that wasn't very exciting. So like Ravi mentioned, I was a cash manager at this US multinational, and these were the days of telex machines. We didn't even have fax machines those days, right? So we had 40, 50 locations. I had to move money around, make sure nobody was out of money and nobody had more money than they needed. But I saw that as when I started my doctoral work, I saw that, I was fascinated to learn that was actually an optimization problem. And that was a network optimization problem, which I had not had the exposure to in my work in India. And I said, wow, I can actually solve the problem. And I can rerun this thing, not spend 20 hours a day whipping around telex messages to every location in the country, but I could actually solve this problem. So that's sort of what actually got me towards AI and towards various kinds of optimization problems. And that eventually then led to my PhD, which was then using optimization, largely, broadly speaking, you can sort of say AI in a class of finance problems, short-term finance, right? That then led to e-credit. And that was an interesting, again, looking back at it, a series of accidents, but I started consulting with a number of companies because of the research that we started publishing. And there's an accidental $500 scholarship that I applied for and got to get my thesis typed. And we all have been poor graduate students, and we know what that is like. But along with it came a call from Procter & Gamble. And that call from Procter & Gamble, interestingly, added a whole new twist to my research and publishing. And it started, I consulted with large Fortune 500 companies. And it's interesting that in a credit economy like the US and now all around the world, the primary lenders in the economy are not necessarily the financial services institutions. It's interestingly, all companies have a pretty large item on their balance sheet called accounts receivable, and it is transient only in a sort of a fictitious sense, right? P&G will always have billions of dollars due from various grocery stores and other customers on its balance sheet, and it's more or less repetitive. So and that's unsecured lending in the economy. When you think about it, if you add up all the receivables of non-financial companies, they in turn are using various lines of credits, etc. But that's a very large lending problem. So I ended up setting up credit policy for many companies. And one interesting realization was, and this happened at Apple, And as I walked away from, I would fly around the world, helping them set up their policy. And I walked away from those, right? They were part policy, part coaching, teaching kind of sessions. I realized that whenever I left the place, I felt like, I'm shortchanging these guys. I leave, they need me again because there is no way of retaining what we are talking about, right? It's a classic problem. So I decided that I needed to create something digital. So I created initially I created a product that will be today. Some people who may be on the call will recognize. It was a there's a product called HyperCard. I don't know how many of you remember HyperCard. It was a fabulous tool from Apple. So I was able to construct an adjunct professor on your desktop. So the idea there was to leave something behind so they can understand basics. But that led to the idea. I realized there are lots of variability in expertise across these companies and within a company. Right? If you go to P&G, you go from one group to another group, you'll find huge difference. So that led me to create my first product in my spare bedroom those days. And I created this system where I codified my knowledge, but really the important thing there, which I think we'll talk about maybe later, is the ability for creating an intelligent system that can adapt to different expertise in different companies. And that was eCredit, right? So let me stop there, but that's sort of how I got into the entrepreneurial bandwagon.
No, this is fantastic, Venkat. And I want to remind the audience that please send us your questions in the chat box. But Venkat, you've been a very successful serial entrepreneur. eCredit was a success, and then Rage has been a phenomenal success. But I want to shift gears to your latest venture in India, English Helper, in the emerging markets, I should say. And I want to set the context. When we think about emerging markets, especially from a Western world, we started off with globalization, take the product from the West into the East, and then we went into globalization, some sort of adaptation. And of course, in the last 15, 20 years, we have moved into reverse innovation, where we are developing products for these emerging markets and bringing them back into the Western world. And our own Ravi is an expert in the reverse innovation space. So I wanted to get into your lessons. You've been a very successful entrepreneur in the Western world. Now you are, your latest venture is English Helper. Especially as it relates to scalable innovation, what are the lessons for us in the West, and what should we be looking for when we think about scalable innovations?
Well, I think it's a very deep question, Raj. So I'm going to try and there are many layers to this. I think the heart of this, first conceptually, the heart of this, I think, is frugal innovation. And I think building from that point on, in the current time and space, you sort of, one manifestation of that I think is reverse innovation. And that for many reasons, not just cost. And as Ravi and his co-author have very nicely framed and given it a lot more rigorous thought. So if you think about, but English Helper, back to it, was the first time that we are marketing something in an emerging economy, right? And many of us have, eCredit was, I think, one of the first ones to set up an Indian subsidiary back in the early 90s, because we had to get a special permission from the Reserve Bank of India to set up this. So the whole BPO movement had not started. The Y2K movement had not started. But I started an Indian entity only because I had to support multiple versions of my product. And I just could not afford to support multiple versions of a product as a startup where we were going through massive technology change. You went from Windows to many versions of Windows to Unix and so on. So that's how it started. And we were doing some form of reverse innovation because I was able to get stuff done, right? Slightly different aspect of it. And then comes the other layer. And so I was able to do a lot more with less, let's say that part of it, right? And I think of that as maybe one form of frugal innovation. I will speak to another form, which I think is that there is a tendency as you're an entrepreneur to think that you can somehow, there are two types of entrepreneurs, right? In our context, one, you raise a lot of money, you've got an idea, you go for it. And that's one type. The second type is you try to raise only enough money that takes you to the next milestone. It's tough. It's a little bit taxing because you don't know whether you're going to get the next milestone money or not. But that is the only sure way, in my mind, to really be efficient in capital investment and achieve the kind of innovative impact that you can. But very specifically to reverse on English helper, I think this speaks to the fact that I'd been reading, it's a sort of several things came together, and really the credit in English helper, I should mention, goes in a very, very large part to a wonderful team that is on the ground in India, led by Sanjay, and I think they've done a remarkable job. But the idea really was two things. One, you read every year that the annual status of education report says in India, which has been going on for 17, 18, 20 years, that says the fifth grader can't read a second grade text, right? So the literacy problem is massive. The second, that I had a personal experience where we had employees who were brilliant, but who couldn't compose an email. So I had to put a layer in between them and my Western world clients. Then my own background in just AI technology and actually the computational aspects of language, I sort of decided that what we could do is to create a scalable product. So we created this AI-driven product, which, as you know, as we speak today, 20 million kids by the end of this year will be on this product. And it's in 10 countries. Largest footprint is in India and Sri Lanka. The entire country of Sri Lanka is on the product. And India is about 14.5 million by the end of this year. But the other important thing here to your question is, when we had to roll out, English Helper is now 8 to 10 years old, right? This is not an overnight success, and speaks to your question. The first thing that the important thing was, will something like this work in India? I had never actually sold anything in India, right? We know we've obviously grown up there. You have your visions of, oh my God, it's going to be a difficult environment and so on. So we decided the first thing we had to do was take the product, go try and sell it to at least one school. And then look at whether, and this is an important thing for all the listeners who want to be entrepreneurs. I think at least, there are many ways to success, but one way to success is focus really very strongly and almost exclusively on impact. If you achieve impact, then a lot of the hurdles fall away. And it's hard, right? The easiest thing, especially in ed tech, is really lots of money. You have some, really interesting new things, but it doesn't work after 5, 6, 7, 8 years, right? So we found in our first school, Raj, that we really found a huge impact on learning outcome in reading and comprehension. So from there we went to, but then when we went from 1 school to 3 schools, we were fine. From 3 schools to 100 schools, a lot of things broke. And that was infrastructure. Every week, these network systems would have viruses on them. So our teams would have to go clean them up, and then so on. But today we are in 100,000 schools. And that's because we have really solved each of these problems without losing that focus on impact, right? And so that, to me, the learning applied to the Western world. Now, I'm on the board of some nonprofits, and recently it was interesting for me to see one social enterprise that one of the companies I'm on the board of, they're talking about an intervention where they spend $10,000 per child. And I was just thinking in my mind, and little to no use of technology. And I'm thinking to myself, English Helper, by the way, costs $2 per student per year. And at higher levels of volume, we could probably go to 10 cents, right? And effective because it is not only just as a piece of software, it has actually allowed us to realize that you can separate pedagogy from content. And that squarely, what we're all seeing, in somewhat a compulsory way in the COVID situation, right? Everybody's on now. Online learning has become the big thing. But English Helper really demonstrated that even in an offline world, real underlying trend there is the separation, that you could be quite effective. But that to me would be that the learnings to me focus on outcome, be
While Venkat signs on, I just wanted to share with the audience his book. It's called The Intelligent Enterprise in the Era of Big Data. Fascinating book, and it's published by Wiley. It's actually a phenomenal insight into the future of AI. So if we have time, one of the questions that I wanted to ask him was about the future of AI, because especially with all pundits talking about mass disruption for artificial intelligence, people are always intrigued. Why has that disruption not happened? So I thought I wanted to ask that. In the meantime, till Venkat is back, I think.
Sorry, Raj, am I back?
Yes,
okay.
You are back.
I had to switch.
I was actually talking about your book, actually.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, please. Yeah.
So I think that to me, the learning here is we have to get into a more, I think reverse innovation is really a very fundamental idea, but I think the motivating factors there to me are think about innovating on a wherever is competitive advantage, right? Can you try things? What is happening is the other important thing that I think supports the idea of reverse innovation, the way Ravi and his co-author have framed it, is that many of these emerging markets are now at a point where they have the ability to leapfrog. Therefore, they have this enormous appetite to try and accept new things. They're ready. So you could potentially do reverse innovation in the sense of trying out things. By the way, no compromise on quality anywhere, and do so at a much more cost-effective way than you can, let's say, in a Western, more mature economy. So let me stop there, and I think I addressed the question.
Perfect. Thank you. And again, please keep your questions coming. I'm going to ask one final question before we go to the audience. So my question, Venkat, is fundamentally about how in the past 10 years or so, in the past decade, we've had a stagnation in productivity, and we are hoping that advanced technologies will help us enhance productivity. And one example is the seamless integration of the supply chain, end-to-end supply chain within a company and then to a broader ecosystem and so on. But the question that I wanted to ask you is, has COVID-19 exposed the underbelly, if you will, of this, in the sense that now people are saying, instead of concentrated in one particular place, which is conducive to scalable innovation, we need to start thinking about fragmenting and having distributed networks and so on. Is it the antithesis to the scalable innovation that you're talking about? How should we think about scalable innovation in this post-COVID era?
I mean, it's a great question, but to me, as we now know, COVID-19 very specifically is not limited to one location, and that it is now everywhere, right? It may have started off in one location. What it has exposed, though, is what we have always known, which is if you have a really high level single point of failure, then you run the risk of a catastrophic incident completely disrupting your business. So I think the question, therefore, but still is a very deeply important one, which is how do you achieve more resiliency and still gain scale, right? And so some examples, I think, some of these, I think, became more prominent in the COVID world, and these are some companies that we've invested in. One of them is a 3D printer company, and I think it's very, very interesting to see that they're now working on the notion of a pop-up factory. That in the you have a supply chain, and let's just take the case of PPE, right? I mean, there's all this craziness around PPE, and a whole bunch of 3D printer companies everywhere rush to help. The question though is, well, I have, it's almost, still today, even though additive manufacturing at scale is becoming, is the next big thing. But I think still today, if you wanted to get a mask, 100 million masks done, you do go to conventional manufacturing, but not when you need 10 masks today, right? So this 3D printer company is called Rise 3D, and they're the only safe 3D printer company in the world, by the way. But Rise 3D very quickly generated these some number of PPE equipment and started delivering to the hospital. And so my answer to your sort of the way to think about them is, how do you fundamentally remove a single point of failure? And how do you, whether it is through pop-up factories, through having maybe mobile robots, intelligent robots, this is true in the case of, all of a sudden you have nursing homes, the other big item in the news, right? Nursing homes, people can't visit them, you can't go treat patients, and we have to reimagine that. You could potentially create one of our other companies its product has become all of a sudden the same product, but through COVID has become, this really solved a single point of failure because we always relied on an in-person visit, right? Telehealth in general is a different kind of failure, but it is the same. It's a human supply chain failure versus a physical supply chain failure. So Raj, I would think of this as really back to basics and really thinking about scale at one level, but resiliency at the other to shocks. So, in many other endeavors, we would always think of, can we have more than one source for every part, right? If you're a manufacturing setup. It is very common for example, in the credit world, for you to have more than one source of finance if you're a bank, or more than one source of information, frankly, right? It was mandated in all these banks that you should use more than one. So from a services side, from a physical side, I sort of think of it more as not as just a sort of a COVID-19 related problem, but I think it is more of to me, a single point of failure problem. Am I making sense? Raj?
Yes, absolutely. Because it's a very interesting point, actually, when you think about scale and scalable innovation, the point is not to isolate it away from resilience. That has to be a common construct, actually. And that's a useful insight for us to have. So I'm going to hand it over to Debbie and Debbie Magnesi. Debbie, are there audience questions for Venkat?
There absolutely are. Venkat, where do you see opportunity for AI in continuing and professional learning? What are areas we should focus on for ease of adoption, and what challenges might we face?
So I see, it's a good question. I see a lot of opportunity, right? I think that is, of course, I'm an entrepreneur, so I see opportunity everywhere generally. But I see a lot of opportunity, and I see opportunity in sort of two broad areas. One, I think, is going to, evolve to adopt more and more intelligent systems, and intelligent as in using AI, right? And these intelligent systems, therefore, are going to lend two sorts of opportunities. That's the first trend. One is, and the two sorts of opportunities, that if you're deeply an expert in a subject, then codifying the subject, learning from, because you're not the only expert, learning from data, and in an ongoing way, I think it's going to be one huge opportunity. And we as a fund have already invested in some 15 companies in the last 15 months. All of them embody that. The second opportunity, I think, is horizontal. And the horizontal opportunity is when you, again, have deep expertise in some specific horizontal technology And that, I think, because there's going to be so much adoption of digital technology, right? And especially if you can combine many of the physical sectors, construction is an example, many other examples. I just gave you the hospital example with just a service provider. All of these are going to embrace more and more digital technologies, digitization with intelligence, and think of it as AI. And so I think there's just enormous opportunities, some of which have existed but have gained more traction as we have through this crisis. Interesting how these catastrophes sometimes are important for us to realize what we've already had but we're not using, like Zoom. This example is a good one. And then there are others that are truly a product of this crisis. So I think that's one. I think for learning, I think the challenge with AI, and I'm just writing an interesting a new paper on a new architecture for AI. I think the challenge with AI is really just doing what everybody is doing, which is go learn some machine learning algorithm, which is really just statistics. I'm not trivializing it, very important. But again, you're not focusing so much on by doing that. But because I think any really valuable application that solves a problem is going to be a combination of just some algorithmic learning from data plus expertise. So I think you need to think about who you are. I don't know if you are a technology person, the person asking the question. If you are, then I'd be focused on learning the broadest possible technology, AI technology. Don't just learn one thing and say deep learning, deep statistical learning, and think that is the next best thing. It is not, right? I think so. Therefore, we need to understand the limitations of each of these and think about the problem you're solving. And algorithms are only a means to solving that problem. So hope I answered your question. But there are lots of online courses, right? And on all of this, I'm happy to send you my paper too if you want.
That's great. Thank you, Venkat. In this COVID-19 pandemic, using AI and surveillance systems, contact tracing, and government will be a new scope of technology. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a very natural application. Of course, there's lots of privacy concerns, but I, as a citizen, would be more than happy to waive any privacy issues I have. I mean, sometimes, and technology can be designed in such a way to minimize or to eliminate such privacy concerns. But I totally believe and agree that this is a classic application. It's an application. When you think of AI, there is levels of AI here, right? Layers of AI, and that's what I like about the application. Many applications are like this, but there's a good example. One layer of AI is simply being smart about connecting data. There's no, the fact that you are within 6 feet of another person who's been diagnosed as either positive or negative or what have you, right? There is no huge amount of, that is really just connecting data. On the other side, there's more involved, and that's very important. A simple thing, right? But it's important. I would think of that as, it's really interesting. The fact that I codify that intelligence in the application is very, very useful. The second layer of AI would be to begin to create more of a predictive, all these models that have emerged, that have predicted the spread of the disease, right? The community spread or other kinds of spread. Can you do real-time modeling of that? Can you alert public health authorities by learning from aggregated data and as it is happening? That's another layer of AI that you could apply, but two very different types of intelligence.
Terrific. Another question. Apparently, the political system in China has not affected innovation. On the contrary, has supported it more than anyone could have imagined. It seems the U.S. is falling behind. In your view, what can the U.S. do to catch up and excel in innovation again?
I think it's very true, right? But if you have had the opportunity to look at China's plans, the strategic plan, I don't know what they call it, it's 5 years or 10 years, I forget now, you will find that AI is integral to that plan. and they have the advantage, obviously, of a centralized command and control, and therefore you can issue an edict and let everybody and have everybody follow. Unlike the U.S., us here, or in other countries, which are noisy, which have many points of view. And thank you. One person on the audience tells me that they are 5 years each. And that's to me, that was a very powerful, bold, and a very far-sighted policy integration of AI and the infrastructure that goes with it, right? Now, I think that there is a real danger here that if you're thinking about falling behind, I do think there's a real danger in the US falling behind. To me, what we need to really do is to encourage innovation by supporting higher ed universities that are very research focused, creating one of the big issues that many startups face in different sectors is the availability of data, and to create an ecosystem that's conducive for people to test, conducive for people to experiment. Now, take EdTech as an example. We hosted a dinner for a whole bunch of EdTech entrepreneurs, and Raj, I think you were there. And the common thing we heard was, I have a great, interesting idea. I've got this interesting technology, but I have nowhere to go test it, right? And so creating the link between labs at places like Northeastern or MIT or Harvard to sort of an extension of, if I may say so, extension of the co-op idea. But how can you innovate? How can you support innovation by creating these maybe labs that are both a contribution of data from the private sector and where you create an environment that's conducive for experimentation and innovation? I mean, that's just a very specific idea. But to me, policy, right? Policy needs to. Many of these countries, by the way, have tax subsidies, which of course we have resisted. We have some, but we have resisted that type of a policy intervention, being a very market-driven economy. But I do believe that while VCs and private equity and so on are great, and we do a lot, but I do think some level of policy intervention, I think, is appropriate.
Terrific, thank you. For software engineers, the future appears bright. Do you think AI will reduce work and jobs and lead to wider unemployment for those that lack the required education?
So you should definitely send your email to Debbie, and I'll send you this paper that I'm writing, or I have a version of it I can send you. But if you look back at a lot of the prognosis, there's a very famous study by a couple of authors from the UK. This is a few years dated now. I think one of them, his name is Frey and Osborne. I think it's Frey and Osborne. They predicted that we will lose 47% of all jobs in the US by now, right? And there's others like David Autor at MIT has done some really pioneering work on what's this technology automation, this wave of technology is doing to jobs, right? And what they see is a hollowing out of the middle income. I mean, there's low wages, high wages, and the middle area is the one that's hollowing out. So there's a few that are moving to the higher end and a lot moving to the lower end. But the aggregate impact, despite this 47%, by the way, has been revised now subsequently by other economists to a much smaller number. So while I think we were all thinking about, oh my God, this time around, every technology wave, I should say, has been preceded by panic, right? Over in history, every wave has been preceded by panic at, oh my God, we're going to lose our jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And none of them have, that has come to pass. That's because the rate of new job creation has far exceeded the displacement of old jobs. And the timing has generally worked out in the past that the dislocation hasn't been painful, right? And the idea of new jobs, training, et cetera. But this time around, and I think I have a section in this in my book, is this time around we didn't know 3-4 years ago. We thought, oh my God, this time is different. We don't even know what new jobs are going to come up. We don't have no idea of training for them because we don't know what they are, right? But 3-4 years into it, I think that the rate of adoption the rate of displacement has been slower than we thought. But it goes back to the question. That's just one answer. The second answer is really that, but it is coming, right? It is coming, and it is coming because of it's going to accelerate. This crisis is going to accelerate some of that or a lot of that. Now, to me, therefore, I would sort of do my pitch on something else that I'm very passionate about, which is how do you use AI to counter this? If AI and automation are the cause of this, how do you use AI and automation to counter this? And I don't know if you've seen, but one of the nonprofits that I'm on the board of, an organization called New Profit, we just announced a $5 million X Prize for rapidly reskilling for future jobs. Step back, rapidly reskilling to find jobs for the 12 million to 40 million Americans that are unemployed, right? Have become unemployed. And so I would say, look, AI presents the greatest opportunity for us. I'm even going to go beyond this very tactical problem, which was caused by COVID, very big problem, but which led us to announce this X Prize. But I think there's a deeper opportunity to all those entrepreneurs out there. The deeper opportunity is, before AI can take away jobs, you should think about how to use AI to solve intractable, vexing problems in every society. There's a huge opportunity. So whether it is skilling, and by the way, it addresses all of the inequities and the access and all those costs and all those issues, because really the marginal cost of rolling out something that you have already created is close to zero. And so I tend to think of it as a huge opportunity that we need to act on without versus only worrying about, is it going to take away my job? A long-winded answer, but I think that yes, that is coming. But two, let's focus on how to use the same technology to reskill, because there will be new jobs. There will be new types of, and there are problems that we haven't solved. Billions of people in the world don't have water, right? Billions of people in the world don't have a basic sustenance in living, right? How do you solve problems that are bigger, societal problems? And I think technology has a huge role to play. And by the way, you don't have to think of that as philanthropy. And I think Raj mentioned this. I hugely believe in for-profit social enterprise, where you, the entrepreneur, can intentionally think about maximizing impact. And this may run counter to your thinking, but intentionally minimize price. And if you do that, then I think, by the way, you will still make lots of money. But I think that is the way to think about, can AI level the playing field? And can AI, and of course, there will be a whole new set of opportunity. Usually innovation breeds its own set of jobs, right? And so I wouldn't worry that much about new jobs. I would worry about displacement this time.
To probe on that just a bit further, Venkat, how would you differentiate or distinguish between the sort of classic definition of social enterprise and social business that you're speaking of?
Yeah, so good question. And the classic social enterprise is generally, there's no such thing as a, if you're not a complete philanthropy, every not-for-profit or non-profit, so let's say just use them synonymously for now, most of them struggle. The ones that don't price their product struggle because they can't scale, right? You're limited by the amount of philanthropic dollars you can attract. And you're always dependent on your donors, right? And if the product, and the way I've tended to think about this, Debbie, is when you're initially solving a problem, where at the very initial stages, sometimes it has to be supported by philanthropy because its economic value is not yet established. And And that is true for a startup, by the way, that has some commercial value. That is true for a nonprofit, right? And so the question, so that you start that way, and the moment you go from there to scale even a little bit, you've got to start to price your product. But it could be a very socially intentioned price. Like I said, English Helper sells its product for $2 a student per year, and we're not going to change our pricing, whether we go to China or US or what have you, right? We might adjust a little bit for local implementation costs, but not for a profit motive. So if you are intentional that way, and if you drive price down, but focus first on impact, I would classify that as a social business, the way you've used it. To me, that's still for profit. It still satisfies a capitalistic motive to generate wealth, but it doesn't compromise impact. To me, the most important thing is don't lose sight of impact. And don't, the same product, the English Helper product, there's a very old version of it in the US that sells for $300 a student. So, and this English Helper product is way better. That's apropos Ravi and Ravi's notion of reverse innovation, right? So it is really, when it comes to technology, often I think our prices are completely inflated because we're being driven by a profit motive. If you're driven by an impact motive, you will still make money, lots of money, frankly. But why? How? And that's an intentional thing because we're not in this market-driven economy. We're not used to thinking that way. We think that we should charge as much as we can. I'm saying charge as little as you can. Yeah, but still make money.
That's fantastic.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you so much, Venkat. Raj, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so I have a very, very quick question for Venkat. We are about 5 minutes away from the end. And Venkat, you are a serial entrepreneur. You are an investor. I know this question is on people's minds. What are the prospects for entrepreneurship, especially in this post-COVID era?
Look, like I think I just very briefly just alluded to my thinking that I think I think, as you know, many people have said famous things, quotes on adversity and how not to waste it, right? And so to me, it seems like the set of opportunities before entrepreneurs has never been greater. And I think you need to recognize, in my mind, and I'm only one guy, but to my mind, our fund has, by the way, knock on wood, fingers crossed, we will close our first virtual investment, all done virtually this week. It's a very interesting company that creates a smart device using AI to help Parkinson's patients live a dramatically improved quality of life, right? Fingers crossed, hopefully that'll happen this week. So but the point is, what we have not seen, I should tell you, we have not seen a drop-off in the number of business plans, pitches that we have seen during the crisis, right?
Wow.
So back to your question, I think there are two kinds of opportunities. One, that digital acceleration is the common theme. And so you think about, and intelligence is the other common theme. So, and they're both somewhat intertwined, right? You can't really do today digital acceleration without intelligence. But you should think a little bit about why has adoption not been so as successful as we were thinking and perhaps fearing? That opportunity hasn't gone, but think about that if you're going to be successful. And I believe it has to do with people not thinking about the scaffolding that you need around your AI. That, it takes, we were working with a large bank, it took them 6 months to produce the small amount of data we needed to build the AI model. Well, if you can't solve that problem, no point in creating the AI model, right? That's one. But generally, digital transformation, I'd say two types of opportunities. One, deep vertical expertise. If you have deep vertical, I believe the future is going to be about computational intelligence. whatever you're doing, forget thinking of it as AI. Right? I mean, you can, if you want, you can, but think about it as computational intelligence. Whatever intelligence you can bring, can you make it computation machine, right? So computational intelligence is one key thing to note. And the second is really scaffolding around that computational intelligence. Make sure you don't lose sight of that. And so I would say either you're going to reimagine. So if you are a finance person, reimagine, either you have expertise from experience and you have to reimagine what you are doing, and can you use it, do it better, right? Dramatically better. Or you are like this person that this is a few graduates out of MIT, that this latest investment we have done. There are so many examples of this. But these are people who've really have deep expertise in a certain problem. So you don't have to worry about, will Google come and do this? Will Apple come and do this, etc. By the way, I think as an entrepreneur, you'd never worry about a big company, a big competitor. I think if you start thinking about this, then you're not ready to be an entrepreneur. Okay, you have to think. You have to be comfortable that you are so convinced about your way of doing things, and not be obstinate, but you have to be convinced. And if you do, then focus on outcome. Most people don't focus on outcome. I think you'll be fine.
Thank you, Venkat. We are at 11:30, so thank you again for those inspiring remarks. And I want to thank the Ravi Ramamurthy and the Center for Emerging Markets for organizing this event. I want to thank our development team led by the wonderful Debbie Magnesi, who deftly moderated the questions, and Abigail for helping organize, etc. But I want to echo Venkat's optimism when you talked about the future of entrepreneurship. I am very optimistic about the future. I'm reminded of a headline in 1894 in the Times of London, which basically talked about how London is going to drown in manure by 1950, 9 feet of manure, because horses ran the show in London in 1894. Of course, it didn't come to pass because cars came to the rescue. As recently as 2002, the SARS epidemic in the East created global behemoths, including Alibaba. When you think about 2008 recession, we saw the emergence of the shared economy and Airbnb and Uber and so on. So I absolutely with you that human ingenuity always triumphs and looks for opportunities in these trying times. But the key is resilience, building resilience into whatever you do. And one other thing that I want to reiterate, and this is something that Venkat has lived by, is to think of social impact, to think of impact, I would say broadly, as a part of any entrepreneurial equation, as part of any venture that you are thinking about, etc. So I want to thank all of you for again being here. Venkat, very grateful to you for this a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj, Ravi, Debbie, Abigail, everybody, and thanks to the audience, of course. Great to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Venkat. Terrific.
Thank you all for joining us. Have a great day. Take care.
Yeah.